the whole premise of the podcast called Why Influence, right? I'm questioning why you should influence. And the fact that I can give one talk, my first talk, and inspire someone to increase their influence or bring their influence into another platform is pretty profound. Wow. Has it been 20 episodes already? I've experienced so much growth over the past couple months with this podcast. The combination of doing this podcast with intention to continue to self-develop myself, as well as pushing my comfort zones to the limit, and having these really amazing and inspirational conversations with influencers has really helped me tremendously, and I hope that these episodes have been helping you as well. The rate at which I'm finding myself growing is crazy to me. You hear my updates every 10 episodes right now, and it just feels like giant gaps because I feel like my growth is just happening so fast. Even since recording this episode, I've pushed myself over another milestone, which out of the 5 years I've owned my car dealership, I've never put my face or personality out there. I just created 6 videos featuring me where I'm talking and test driving 6 of the cars in my inventory. I've driven the S14 Silvia set up for drifting. I've driven a GTR with a T67 single turbo, a Celica GT4 and all-wheel drive, and a couple other cars. It's only been 3 days since posting my first car review video, and it already has 500 views. And when I think about it, when I spoke on stage at Podcast Movement, I spoke in front of 400 to 500 people. So this video has already surpassed the number of people that I spoke on stage to, and it's crazy to think about that. As of right now, I'm actually in India. I'm in the early stages of my 1-month-long honeymoon where I'm going to India for 2 weeks, Mumbai and the Himalayas, and then I'm going to Botswana for 2 weeks, which is in southern Africa. It's actually the country with the largest population of wild elephants in the continent of Africa. Now, I know this is off topic, but I've been told by multiple people that I need to share this experience. Some even said on the podcast, but I've questioned whether this would be a fit for the podcast. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on if and how I should share some of the experiences from my honeymoon. Without further ado, let's jump into this interview. You're going to hear Nathan interviewing me on how the podcast is going, what kind of doors have opened, and what life has been like since the last time I gave an update after 10 episodes, because now it's been after 20 episodes.
Welcome to the Why Influence Podcast, where we deep dive into the why behind some of the world's most influential people. Why do you influence? Why are you an influencer? We hope to inspire you to share your voice with the world. And now, your host, Jeremy Segal.
All right, Nathan, it's that time again. I appreciate you coming on the podcast to interview me and how things are going and to get an update. So I'll open the floor for you to take control.
Awesome. Thank you for having me back, Jeremy. And shout out to the Why Influence listeners. Well, I'm really excited to get back or to be back. And let's just jump right into it. When we left off last time, your biggest challenge was lining up guests. And I know ultimately you want to get to where you have a few in queue and you can do one a week and maybe more than that. But why don't you update us a little bit on, if I remember at that time you had 2 or 3 in the queue. And so why don't you kind of give us an update on where you are with the challenge of finding guests for the podcast?
Yeah, sure. Basically, last time we talked was after I did 10 interviews, and now I've done 20 interviews. As of recording this with you, I have 18 of those interviews live and a total of 20 episodes live if you include episode 0 and then the update after the 10th interview. So I've got 3 recorded episodes right now that I need to edit so that I can then post. So that puts me at 18 plus 3, that's 21 episodes that I'm currently sitting at that I've interviewed. And then I have 6 scheduled in the pipeline. And that, as far as I've got 2 scheduled in December. So it's not like I've got 6 scheduled the next week or 2. They're sort of scattered around over the next couple months. But I've got 6 in the pipeline, which I feel like is pretty strong compared to how we were last time. And something that's important to me is keeping the caliber of the guests. And so far I've been able to hold true to that. And I've had some awesome guests. So the 3 that I have in the pipeline that I've interviewed that I haven't posted yet are pretty awesome interviews and they're really good guests. And then the 6 I have scheduled, they're just the same. They're all awesome people and awesome guests.
That's exciting. That's awesome because they have been really good so far. And we all appreciate you keeping up the quality for sure. So So it sounds like you have a few more in the pipeline than you did last time, but it's not necessarily as steady as you'd like.
Yeah, I don't really have like 4 weeks out scheduled so that I can have like the cushion to then put more energy into maybe bringing on an extra guest and having 2 episodes a week or something like that. I'm just working to keep up with the one a week type thing. And even with the 6 in the pipeline and the 3 recorded, if I just had those through the year, that's not going to hold me at one a week. So even though I'm doing much better, it's still not enough to keep me at that consistency of once a week hitting the podcast with an episode.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's your strategy going forward? What are you going to do? Well, let me ask you this. What's yielded the most guests? What things are you doing that work the best?
Because a lot of the guests have been such high caliber, most of them have come from networking or cold reaching out. Most of the people I've brought on are probably from like going to a conference. I've got 6 in the pipeline and I just did 3 mostly because I went to Podcast Movement, a podcast conference, which we'll dive into later. But that helped a lot because I could interact with people who are influencing and try to either get people who are there who I feel is a good fit, or talk to people that are there, maybe the vendors or just other people, and say, hey, this is the kind of guest I'm looking for. Do you know anybody? And try to get some referrals. And that's been able to get me a good amount of guests. I've also had some cold contacting. Keith, he has a YouTube channel that does reviews for headphones. I saw actually a tweet from Red Vermina. She's one of my earlier guests. She retweeted one of his posts saying that he's quitting his job or that he just quit his job to pursue YouTube full time. So then I drilled into his platform and to see if he would be a potential fit for the show. It looked like he would be. So I just contacted him and said, hey, I saw Romina retweeted this. You're doing YouTube full time. I'd love to bring you on the show and extract your why. And it ended up turning into an awesome interview. So I think that right now it's a lot of me going out there, going to conferences and networking, or just digging online and finding people and cold contacting, or asking people that I interact with, like who they follow, and just reach out to them and just see if anybody replies.
Well, I think the thing that stands out there to me is meeting people at conferences. It's a lot of networking and it takes your time, it takes your money, but I know that I was invited on a few podcasts from going to an event earlier this year, and it wasn't a podcasting event, but at those events you get to know people a little bit better. You get to talk to them, see what they're about, and if you vibe with someone, right? So I think it's a good place, but I think also when you go to places where you have to pay to be there, you're gonna meet people that are just in a different place, right? That they're serious about being there. And so are you planning on incorporating that into your strategy more? Are you going to be attending more events in 2020, or what? Do you have any idea of how you can incorporate that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to that. I think especially in the early days of getting the podcast rolling, networking is going to be the biggest component to bring people on, unless I have like a team of people just drilling online and contacting, cold calling influencers. So I actually do have plans to go to TwitchCon, which is coming up out in California. I'm visiting my sister who lives out there, and we're going to go to that together. And my only reason to go out there, aside from visiting my sister, is just to get some podcast guests. So I'm going to be going to TwitchCon and just I'll interact with people there. I haven't really brought on too many live streamers on the show, and I really want to bring them on to drill into them about like how the community feels, as opposed to a lot of people that are doing podcasting or YouTube or Instagram. I think community is very different. So I sort of handpicked that
That's exciting
conference, and I'm looking forward to getting some live streamers to come on here and share their journeys. So that's coming up next month, actually. So I'll be going to that, and hopefully I can get a handful of people from there.
I think you can for sure. Okay. But you also reached out to somebody, cold contacting them. How did you initially reach out? How did you initially make contact?
The example I talked about with Keith with the headphone reviews, for him,
Yeah, how'd you make contact with him?
I believe I sent him a private message on Instagram and emailed him. I never really know how to communicate with people online, because it depends on the platform they use, and some platforms can be flooded with inquiries, so then certain methods are better than others. So I've been trying to do 2 to 3 different methods and just say, hey, I also emailed you and sent you a private message on Twitter. And then on the email, hey, I also sent you an Instagram and a Twitter, and just hit him on a couple platforms just for the better chance of getting through.
That's smart. That's really smart. So with him, it was kind of nice because you had Red Ruina, and you could say you had the tweet to reference. So you personalized it, right? So I think that's really important, especially if you're reaching out cold, right? I'm not just reaching out to anybody. I'm reaching out to you specifically. And this is why I'm reaching out to you. I think it's really important if you're going to do cold prospect. I mean, I think it's tactically hitting all those different platforms. You never know how somebody communicates, right? Some people don't even check their email, and some people don't check Facebook or whatever. So that seems really, really smart. I think the other thing, again, is you connecting why you're reaching out, even though it's not like you didn't go and you just gave a reason. I think that's really important. Sometimes just the because. I'm doing this because lets people know that it's, so I think that might have had something to do with your success. And I think going forward, when you see people that you'd like to connect with, do the same thing and just make sure you make it personal. So it sounds like that's going to be your strategy going forward is attending some more of these events. I mean, also the thing when you're at these events and you're able to talk to people and like, okay, well, if you know anyone else that's like this, that networking, but again, with the people that you bring on, people tend to know other people of the same caliber, right? You're bringing on these guests with these really top quality guests, but they don't know like other schlubs. Like they're going to know, or on some level, they're going to know other people that,
Right.
that they can recommend. So I think
Like to give you an example, at the podcast conference, one of the guys that had a booth there, a vendor, we had gotten to chatting. And then after the conference, I had followed up with people just saying, nice to meet you. If you know anybody, please refer them type email. And he actually was like, oh, I know somebody. And he referred him. I interviewed him, and he's got a big podcast. I mean, he gets tens of thousands of downloads per episode that he puts out there. And he even has one episode that's gotten 500,000 downloads on it. And so he's killing it in the podcast community, and it's just cool. I mean, this guy, Mark Metry, and he even said that once his podcast goes live, which is the next one to go live as of recording this, that he'll shout it out in some way. So I'm excited about that. And you know, these people are believing in the mission. I think it's a good mission, and that's what's motivating the most to come on the podcast, which I think is the most important thing, because it's not like I'm bringing them tons of followers just for coming on the show. And actually, speaking of that, so we just passed 2,000 total downloads for the podcast. You know, with
congratulations.
Thanks. So with 20 episodes, that's about 100 average per episode. And then it also in the statistics shows that we passed 50 countries, which is pretty crazy to think that the reach hits that many countries when you have 100 downloads per episode. I don't really know how that's all working out, but the analytics say it, so it's pretty cool.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Right. So you did a follow-up email to some of the people you met at the conference, and then that follow-up email yielded another awesome guest, right? So I think those are two things that people can take away, right? Is networking and seeing who they know. So understanding who it is that you want to bring on and asking them. But then it seems like you're doing follow-up and you're trying to do follow-up. I think that's very important, because a lot of people will try once and people just get busy. And so pursuing it can yield things. So that's important with bringing guests on. And I think it's really awesome. And I know it's challenging, but I think you're doing better and better, and you're new at this. So it'll be interesting to see what this next conference brings. And it might be really cool to, I don't know, you went to a podcasting conference, and of course you're going to find podcasters there. Might be really interesting to go when you go to Twitch and meet some of those people. They're not usually coming on podcasts. So it might be a really neat opportunity for them to get something out there that they don't usually do. And the mission, I'm glad that's getting through to people, right? That there's a reason why, and that they're resonating with it. So I'll be excited to hear. I know you're honing down the message, and the mission's really, really pretty clear. And so I'll be excited for you to share that with everyone too. Do you want to talk a little bit about the podcast conference that you were just at?
Yeah, it's a pretty pivotal moment for me, because doing the podcast by itself, if you've been following since the beginning, you know it's outside my comfort zone to be sharing like this and being vulnerable, putting myself out there. And at the podcast conference, I did it's sort of like a TEDx style talk. It's a 5-minute talk with 20 slides, and you get 15 seconds per slide, and auto changes every 15 seconds.
Wow.
So it was my first speaking on stage with cameras. There was 300 to 400 people in the audience. Like, I was super nervous, and I gave a talk basically just talking about, it's the 4 ways to become an unstoppable influencer. And I broke it out into the four biggest things I found so far in the podcast from the interviews, which is to know your why, be yourself, choose your platform, and focus on community. So I gave a 5-minute talk on that on stage, talking about that. And just when I got off stage, my hands were shaking, like I was super nervous. But I made it through the talk, and people said that I didn't come across as really nervous when I was up there. So that was just a big moment for me, just going on stage and talking in front of people and making it through live.
Well, first of all, congratulations, making it through alive, right? That's the fear. I'm so glad you're able to do that. And so obviously you say it's getting out of your comfort zone and getting up there and talking in front of 300-400 people. And I think it'd be out of a lot of people's comfort zone. But what people might not understand is that this has been a multi-year journey. Right. And so I promise the audience, I'm trying to get all the details of this story because it goes back several years and starts with a check to help Jeremy get better communication. So getting to this point, like I said, I know that there was years of effort and meetings and trial talks to get up the momentum, right? To be able to get that far out of your comfort zone. And so I'm going to dig out that story because I've gotten a little bit of it, but I think it's going to be pretty awesome to hear more of it for everybody. But in doing that, you stepped outside your comfort zone. I want to come back to that a little bit. Aside from your speech and what came out of that, was there anything interesting that you learned? What was the biggest outcome that you got at the event?
For me, the fact that I made the talk was a big success point for me. I think I learned a lot about myself. I sort of aimed at trying to memorize the talk as opposed to talk it through. And I think that I'm still learning my style of speaking. And that's something that was my first time on stage doing something like that. It's going to take me a while to figure that out. So there's a lot of growth that came out of it. But I met a lot of awesome people at the conference, and a ton of people who, when I would talk to them about the podcast or what I'm doing, they vibed a lot with it. They thought that I was had a great mission. That they were watching me from when they met me, maybe before I gave my talk to after the conference. And this guy, Jason, he actually said that he saw a significant growth just through the conference. And he doesn't even know me from before the conference. He saw me at the beginning of the conference. We met every once in a while throughout it, and we saw each other at the end. And he commented how I had just grown so much just for being there.
And if I'm correct, you were able to capture what he said, weren't you?
Yeah, let me pull up his.
Let's hear that. Yeah, play it for us so we can hear it real quick. It's really awesome.
Yeah, so as a therapist, one of the things that I love focusing on is seeing people's potential come out of them. And having met you over the last couple of days and seeing where you're coming from, that you've been doing this only for a little time, and seeing yourself be uncomfortable to get comfortable, and seeing that growth just in a few short days is really profound for me. And that's why I said to you, like, one of my highlights was hearing that story, because those are the things of why I love what I do, and connecting with people like you and seeing you now go up there. And my guess is that there's going to be people in the future who are going to be like, oh man, well that guy did that, and if he can do it and he was so uncomfortable, that's going to come, and continue that inspiration for people in the future.
That's such an awesome message. And so there's so much there. And like, he saw you in the beginning and saw you kind of have a mini transformation. And when you step outside your comfort zone as much as you did, right, that usually creates a transformation. That's like a blossoming to get that far out of your comfort zone and succeed. So he was able to witness this transformation that you made and kind of record it for us. And that's really exciting. But so that we call that, right, that's an unintended consequence, right? You were just doing your thing and somebody witnessed the transformation and wanted to let you know that they saw it and that it made them happy, right? How did that feel to you when he came up and told that to you? How did that make you feel?
I mean, it felt pretty awesome. I mean, that came up after we had a conversation, which basically he had asked me, like, what was your favorite moment of the day? And what I shared with him was just saying I went to this session that actually Christina Barcy was running, and she was talking about the why. And I shared a little bit of my vulnerability in there. And then she opened up to the floor for other people to ask for advice. And she opened it for the people in the audience to share advice for him. So it's sort of the whole room helping each other out. And I raised my hands like, I've got something to say for this guy. And I gave him some advice on his situation, and I think it's good advice, and he seemed to like it. And I actually met with her afterwards, and she had told me that her favorite moment of the entire conference for her was when I shared what my thoughts to help that other guy in that session. And so I shared with Jason that my favorite time of the day was when Christina told me that her favorite time of the day was when I shared in her session. And then after I shared that story, I asked him, well, what's the favorite moment for your day? And he said, this moment, like you sharing that with me, like that's what touched me. And
wow.
So after we had that conversation, I was like, I got to capture something here. Can you give me a little testimonial or something? Because that's pretty profound to me.
Wow. That's a really, really awesome story and connection that's just so cool. And he said something in there. He said his guess was that somebody was going to see you stepping outside your comfort zone and be inspired by it. And he couldn't have been more right, could he? Because somebody else came up to you after your talk and delivered another unintended consequence. And you got out there, you got outside your comfort zone, and you gave that talk. And the universe wanted you to know that it was proud of you and that you did a good job. So it sent you another unintended consequence. So why don't you play that one for us?
Yeah, just to give you a quick piece of context for it.
Please do.
It was the day after I gave my talk, and I was just sitting at a table, just catching up with some emails and messages on my phone. And this lady approached me, and she had told me that me going up and get on stage had inspired her. And so we got into a conversation about it. And after she shared the impact that I had on her for giving my talk, she started walking away. And then I was like, thinking to myself, I got to capture this moment, right? Like, this is a pretty awesome moment. So I chased her down. I was like, do you mind if I just get a quick word from you? Just basically something along the lines of what you just told me. And she got real nervous real quick because she didn't want me to do a video. And I was like, I can do audio only. It's fine. And so here, I'll share it with you here.
So I've just gone up to Jeremy and said, because he did the Ignite thing yesterday and I saw him do it, I've now challenged myself to do it next year in 2020, even though I have no idea what I'm going to speak about and it terrifies me, but I've got 1 year to figure out what to do, and then I feel like if I do it and overcome it, something good will come from that.
And do you think that would have come up if I didn't speak?
No, there's no way. If I hadn't seen you speak doing that, I wouldn't have thought that I could do it myself. So you've inspired me to do it, even though, even now, I feel a bit sick because I'm terrified. But I know I have to do it. It's something I have to do.
That's awesome.
Because of you.
That is so awesome, man. I mean, that ripple effect of you stepping outside your comfort zone and just being true to yourself in your journey, and it impacted somebody on a way that we don't know where that ripple is going to go, right? What the unintended consequences of her getting on stage next year, and maybe she inspires somebody else. So first of all, congratulations on doing that. And then I'm so glad that it came back to you and that you went out there to record it, right? So that we could hear it. So thank you for that. But tell me, how did that make you feel when you heard that? Like, on a real level, how did that make you feel?
I mean, to me, I'm still working on how I'm articulating feelings in a deep level, but basically, like, I felt really good from it. And the whole premise of the podcast called Why Influence, right? I'm questioning why you should influence, and the fact that I can give one talk, my first talk, and inspire someone to increase their influence or bring their influence into another platform is pretty profound. And that's just from showing up in one place and doing something. So I don't really know who's listening to this podcast and what kind of unintended consequences are coming from that. If I'm getting 100 listens per episode and I don't know who's listening. And I think that's true when you're standing on stage too. You don't know who you're impacting, and a lot of times they walk away and you don't get to hear that. And I think it was awesome that I was still at the conference and she was able to approach me and I could hear that. And if she said that, I don't even know if there's a couple other people who feel the same way. I don't know, but it was a pretty awesome feeling when she came up and shared that.
And if you can impact just one person, right, then your time and energy and effort was worth it. And it was no small amount of time, energy, effort for you to be able to do that. So that's really awesome. So is there anything else about the podcast conference that you want? I mean, that right there makes for a pretty amazing time. And then you got some speaking guests from it. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or did you want to move on?
Yeah, I mean, we can keep going down the ripple effect rabbit hole if you want, because I shared that story on Instagram and just did a post just saying like, hey, I spoke at this conference and then I was able to impact this person at the show, I basically said what we just talked about. And then someone who I don't really interact with or talk to, but I met her once at an event, and then she took the time to send me a private message on Instagram, a voice message. So I'll play that for you. But I think just the ripple effect of just me going on stage, being vulnerable and sharing once, the kind of impact that it has, even with my small level of influence that I have. Here, I'll share that.
Awesome. Yeah, play that for us.
Her name's Carla.
Hi, Jeremy. I just wanted to say congratulations. I just read your post and I thought it was amazing, and I just commented on it. But I just wanted to I don't know, give kudos to you, because I know when we talked at Create IRL, you had mentioned, being an introvert and being scared to talk to people, but pushing yourself. And I think that's incredible. I really admire you doing that. And so, anyways, just wanted to say hi and keep doing what you're doing.
I got that message from someone I interacted with once, and I was memorable enough for her to remember our conversation. And then also she saw the post and then took the time to send me a private message and give me encouragement to keep on going. I think that's, all that from doing the speaking on stage thing.
That's awesome. Well, of course you're memorable, so it doesn't surprise me. Give yourself a little more credit than that. But that she took the time to reach out and congratulate you, and that it touched her like that is really, really amazing. And it's all, you had this unintended consequence and you shared it with people, and that gives people the experience of it. It helps them understand it. And so, man, that's the ripple effect of these just like I said, I feel like that's the universe telling you that you're on the right path. You're doing something that's uncomfortable. You're doing something that's taking a lot of work and a lot of growth. You have to build up momentum so you can break through these barriers. And when these unintended consequences come back to you, it's such a gift, right? And then you sharing that gift with other people, it's like giving it again, right? Because they can feel that experience and understand it. And so yeah. I think identifying little things as the blessing that they are, right? These little unintended consequences, and making a big deal out of them so that we can appreciate them for the impact that they really are. Because a lot of times it's easy to brush stuff off. But when the ripple of your actions comes back to you, when the echo comes back to you and tells you, thank you for that, you really got to take a moment to take that in. And you sharing with us allows you to take it in, and it gives us a powerful reminder to take those in if we're blessed enough to receive that echo back. So thank you for sharing that. And I know you have some plans to really focus on unintended consequences, these blessings for your audience, so that you can really shine a light on them.
That's a lot of stuff that I sort of drill into my guests, and it's not something I've really experienced much myself, because I usually would just interact with one-on-one with people. So I may have unintended consequences with those one-on-one conversations, but it's not like I'm standing on stage in front of 300 to 400 people or talking on a podcast with 100 people. It's a different thing.
It's definitely a different thing, and it's really awesome. It's like,
and I think that sharing the unintended consequences is actually, it makes it more powerful. I mean, to me at least, like if standing on stage and giving my talk, like I gave a talk that I felt like was good and had good content, but me impacting someone from that talk and then sharing that I impacted someone, to me feels like I am making more impact with the sharing of the impact than I am of the actual talk itself. Even though maybe my community is not as large as the audience that I spoke to in that room, it just feels like it's more powerful, I guess. And that's what I'm extracting a lot from the guests that I bring on the shows, drilling into their unintended consequences and seeing the kind of impact. And that should help with motivation for starting to share or to continue sharing.
I like that. And here's the thing, though. All these unintended consequences, these blessings that have come, seems like they've come from stepping outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Right? Because like that was just it, is the first gentleman, Jason, saw you and you stepped way outside your comfort zone, and then he witnessed like this growth in you that was obvious over a short period of time, because we don't know all the things you did to be able to do that yet. But that culmination, when you actually did it, it created a change and an obvious change to people. And that change created a ripple effect, and it impacted people. And it's so awesome, but it comes from this thing that seems like you're doing over and over again, and it's building up momentum so that you can step outside your comfort zone. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I even had some thoughts of it's taken me a while. I got to the 10 interviews really quickly because I had some in the pipeline before starting the podcast, so we did our update. It feels like a long time since we did our update back then. And so much has happened since then. I mean, the podcast conference wasn't yesterday, it was a couple weeks ago now.
Right.
And so I think that there's so many times where I'm feeling that leap, or I'm stepping outside the comfort zone and stepping out again and stepping out again. But now we're here having this conversation after I just took 3 or 4 or 5 stepping out of comfort zone sessions or moments. And I think it's going pretty fast. That's what it feels like.
I think you're being called to level up, right? Because what you're doing can have such a big impact. I want to talk to you a little bit about, we didn't talk about this, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what you're willing to share, what you can share about your why, right? Because you talked about the in your talk, right, the 4 parts, and you talk about how your why it's resonating, your mission's resonating with the guests and things. And so you've talked about this awesome blessing of unintended consequences and how stepping outside your comfort zone can have this impact on people. But can you share with us a little bit about why you're doing this now that you've taken some time to ask yourself?
Yeah, I just pulled up on my website to help me recall with the articulation and the words. But basically,
Gotcha.
I'm looking to inspire the sharing of hidden knowledge and wisdom so we can raise the collective consciousness level of the human race. So for me, being an entrepreneur, having built and sold businesses and building a successful location-free lifestyle, I really only impacted people I interacted with one-on-one. And I felt like there's a lot of wisdom, hidden knowledge and hidden wisdom that I had that people didn't have access to. And then thinking further on that, I feel like there's a lot of other people out there like that, just on whatever it is that they're good at or their knowledge and wisdom is about. So encouraging them to start sharing that knowledge or that wisdom will then impact other people, which in turn will raise the consciousness level of the human race. And so it's sort of the premise of the podcast, why influence? Why should you influence? Why should you share? It's because other people can learn from what you have and learn from what you can share with, and that can just help raise us that much faster as just like as a collective human race.
That's so amazing. And the thing about that, right, is you just being you and being your authentic self is what creates those blessings of unintended consequences. You step outside yourself and grow who you're supposed to be. And I love that. I love that mission. I think it's so important because so many people we don't even know what these hidden knowledge and wisdom is all the time, right? It has to be extracted. And so a lot of times it happens just by accident from sharing and being your authentic self. And that's what the journey that you're on, and you're bringing that to us. And so I'm really excited about that. Thank you for sharing. Then there's another thing I want to talk. You got an audit of your podcast, didn't you?
I did. Actually,
how did that come about?
One big goal of mine, actually, when I went to the podcast conference, aside from the speaking, which was my number one, was also networking, getting people to build in my community and get guests. The next biggest thing for me was to find someone to give me an audit or give me feedback on how my podcast sounds or appears from someone who's experienced in the industry. So I would just ask around, I asked network, asked people. It just seemed like it was pretty hard to find and to locate someone. I finally found somebody, and I followed up with him after the conference and was like, hey, I'm looking to do an audit. They asked me, send me an episode that you want us to audit. It's a 2-person podcast, and they actually do the audit live on their podcast and then release it to their podcast. So I can leave a link to that in the description if you want to check that out. It was a really valuable audit.
Yeah, for sure.
But basically they audited the Rady's Ride episode 7, the school teacher who left his job to be a YouTuber. And they both listened to the entire podcast before talking to me. They made a couple points that they thought that could be improved. They cut out a couple pieces to listen to. So when we were on the podcast live, they actually played a couple clips and said, okay, what was going through your head when you asked this question? Or they would drill into different things. And they did that for the entire episode. And then at the end, they're like, is there anything else you want us to audit? Or is there any other feedback you want? So then we went through our website. They gave feedback on that. They said, why do you have Google Play link for your podcast? It should be Google Podcasts. They just switched over. Like, that's not good. So like a lot of little tweaks, suggestions they gave there. And then we drilled into the analytics. And they said most people are vulnerable with it or just like to hide it for some reason. And I don't really get that. If you have a YouTube channel, you know how many views you're getting. If you got an Instagram account, you know how many likes you're getting. Like, why does podcasting have to be all behind the doors, right? So I was like, I don't care if you show all my analytics. And so then we started drilling into that, and we tried to see some trends that were going on. And then also to make sure that the descriptions and the titles and the keywords, like all that was set up correctly. We just did a full audit basically on that episode and my podcast at the moment. And actually, now that we'll talk about it later, but I've gone through a big pivot on how I'm asking questions and the flow of the episode. So after I do a handful more interviews and get to somewhere where I feel sort of complacent, I would like to go back to them and get another audit, because I think that was really valuable.
That's really awesome. I think what's also valuable is that you sought it out. To seek out feedback like that and be open and be vulnerable and authentic with your numbers and everything, so you can get the real feedback, I think is really important. And it's a really, really strong lesson to people, because feedback is hard and scary, but it's the best way we can jump, right?
Yeah, I can give you a couple pieces of feedback.
I'm gonna say, what are the pieces of feedback that you got the most out of?
They give us a ton of feedback, but I'm just going to mention a few. I've got my notes here in front of me. Well, first of all, they said don't start with asking the background. I have this guest who just quit his job to be a YouTuber. He's got, at the time, 80,000 YouTube subscribers. He's got quite a bit more now. But my first question's, what's your background? What did you do before this? And asking that before making him a hero isn't as powerful. So I'm shifting things now to dive much quicker into making them a hero in the episode and making the guest just be who they are in reality. And then later I can backtrack. So you've made it this far, and this is the kind of success you've had. What was it like before? And then revisit the background if there's time, because maybe sometimes there's not time, and then you have more time to get more value out of it. So that was one big piece of feedback for the intro piece of it. Was just, I felt like the starting off of each episode was a little bit weak. I couldn't really pinpoint why or articulate why. And I think that was a pretty good point on that. Another one was I tend to ask a question and then frame it. So I would say, so when did you become an influencer in your eyes? Was there a moment when da-da-da-da-da? And when you sort of should switch that. It should be, was there a moment when da-da-da-da-da? When did you become an influencer in your eyes? Finish with a question. So I should frame the question, then ask the question, as opposed to ask it, then frame it. I felt like I needed to clarify the question I was asking and fill in the white space that was there. And they said to switch that. And if there's white space, just let there be white space. You can edit it out or just like let it be there. And there's nothing wrong with that.
That's really good advice. And that's why you got to seek out people that are professionals in what they do, right? So you couldn't pinpoint some things, and they were able to put their finger on it so that it made sense to you. And
yeah, there's a couple other ones I wanted to mention real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
I had my question of asking if they struggled, like a yes, no, have you ever struggled with motivation? And then asking for an example when they did. And they suggested that it's safe to assume that everyone has struggled with motivation. It's a struggle. And if they haven't, then that's the question itself to drill into. So instead of having a yes, no question and then following up with why, just jump into it and say, tell me a time when you struggle with motivation, and just jump right into it. So making my questions a little bit stronger is helpful. Addressing the audience, I'm still working on that, and we can talk about my note card in a little bit. But basically they said, I would say you guys. I would address the listener as you guys as opposed to you. And they suggested that I say, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast and make it so I'm having a one-on-one conversation with you as a listener. So that you have the guest, you've got the listener, and then you've got the group of people who are listening. And I was always addressing the group as you guys, and that's not the ideal way to do it. And they gave an example of saying that on their podcast, they get a lot of feedback from their audience saying that they really feel like the host is talking to them. And it's like all this information and conversation being talked to them. And that's not something that my podcast feels like. So that's something that I'm going to try to work on more, is to take a moment and say, hey, did you hear what Rady just said about this? And talk to you as the audience and listener. And there's quite a bit more points, but that's just the gist of the kind of feedback they gave.
Yeah, well, you got a laundry list of stuff to do, but sounds like you got a plan to implement a bunch of it, right? So, and I think that's one of the things that people need to pay attention to throughout this journey is if you go back to where you were the first interview to where you are now, right? You're seeking growth, and you're doing it by stepping outside your comfort zone. And one of the best ways to step outside your comfort zone is get some of that uncomfortable feedback and apply it. And so you have some changes or some shifts in the podcast so you can make it better for the listener. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you mentioned one thing where you want to make them the hero sooner. What are some other shifts that we can expect in the interviews coming up?
One major flow, similar to starting out with the background question and jumping in, is more just jumping in and not focusing as much on the background and then seeing where it goes. So I sort of revisited the flow that I was using, the questions I would use to like sort of get me through the episode, and made it sort of a softer conversation as opposed to rigid questions, and focusing on certain topics. So I want to focus more on unintended consequences because I feel like there's a lot of value, a lot of energy, a lot of motivation that comes from that. So there's a lot of different points that I'm trying to make or that I'm trying to extract that I want to put more effort into. You know, being authentic, that's always something that comes up. So drilling to that. Barriers you have to overcome. Everybody's overcoming barriers, and in order to do that, they've got to have some kind of step-by-step process to get them to overcome those barriers. A lot of times they have to give themselves permission to overcome those barriers. Otherwise, they'll never do it, or they won't have the motivation to do it. So trying to just completely just change how the conversation is going to go. So, you know, right now I've got 18 live interviews. I think the next two that I've recorded are using the old flow, and then actually the 21st episode starts with the new flow. And that's going to take me a little bit of iterations to get through to feel comfortable in that flow. But I think it's a lot more powerful. And even when I use it in the one interview I've done so far, the amount of energy that I got from the guest, just the feedback I got from, he emailed me after and said, I hugely enjoyed the conversation. And so I'm getting really good feedback. At the end of the episode, he said, I've done a ton of interviews, and a lot of times I get halfway through the interview and I feel like, what have I gotten myself into? But he just did nothing but praise the mission and praise the whole flow in the podcast. And that was just from the one that I've done so far. So I'm excited to see where things go with that.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. I know how hard you worked to get clarity on that, right? To get clarity on that process. And so one of the things you talked about was addressing the audience more individualized. And so we kind of came up with a strategy for you, because just so you can remember who you're talking to and what you're trying to focus on, right? You wanted to give yourself a tool. So what did you do?
Yeah, I struggled. Like, I talked to several people, like Heath. He had the YouTube channel, and in his episode, he talked about how he would imagine having a friend sitting next to him, then he could talk to him, and that can make it more of a conversation sounding thing. And for me, I struggle with that because I'm sitting here having a conversation with the guest, and it's hard for me to think that I also have a friend next to me. So one thing actually that you suggested, because you've been helping me a lot with coming up with my why and helping me with everything, is I've put together this note card that I've been wanting to have for a while, actually. I wanted a note card that I can refer to for maybe points that I want to drill into, that I can glance over and say, oh, that sounds like an unintended consequence. Let's dive deeper into that. I didn't really have those specific things articulated as well. So I didn't really have a reason to create a note card to know what to put on it. But one thing is I haven't created the final version yet. It's just drawn on paper, and I'm a really bad artist. But basically, I've got a picture of one person, and that's you as the listener. And so anytime I'm talking to the guest, if I feel like I want to address you, I can look over at this picture of a one person on the note card and start talking to that person and addressing it as you. And that's the listener. Next to it, I've got a picture of an audience, and that will be the we and the us. And anytime I feel like what the guest has said is impacting sort of the mission or the bigger picture, I can look at the audience and then imagine myself talking to an audience and then address it as we and us. So it's a way to just look to the side and glance to the side and pull in the feeling of having that in front of me. And that should help me at least try to build some habits to draw those words out.
And I think that's important, right? It's the habit, because I know from talking to you that you've internalized who you're talking to. Like, I know you're super passionate about the people that you're talking to and the group, the movement that you're hoping to create around this. And so we spent a lot of time going over everything you knew about them. And you, the listener, you're an amazing person. From everything Jeremy's told me about you, you're an amazing person. At least that's who he's talking to. And so if you're vibing with this show, if you're vibing with Why Influence, it means you're a really special person, because he's targeting a very specific type of person that is really special, and he really wants you to share your authentic self, right? So you can receive the unintended consequences. But sometimes it's hard to talk to the person you know you're talking to. And so the card is a tool. And so I'm excited for you, Jeremy, to use that tool so that you can connect and bring us together as a movement, right? And that's what we're looking to you as the leader to do, is to bring us together. And so I'm really excited. I'm really excited about the changes. I can't wait to hear them, the flow, anything that makes the flow stronger. And you still got to get comfortable with it. So if it worked when you were uncomfortable with it, I can't wait to see and hear and experience what it does. So is there anything else you want to talk about?
Not really. I mean, I've been giving updates of minor tweaks at the end of each of the episodes. So if you listen to an episode and you stick it through to the end, then you get to hear my thoughts on the episode, my thoughts on how I'm doing, and then some of the things that I'm doing to self-improve. And probably one of the bigger things that I've done recently is to open up the floor at the end and say, is there any last words or any pieces of advice you'd like to share to our audience addressing the guest? And I found that oftentimes, every time I've done it so far, I've done it on about 4 episodes now, that the most valuable pieces of advice are coming out of that. And that's something that I haven't even asked in the first chunk of episodes. I'd ask my question, I'll drill into that, but it's not as open-ended. And so I'm finding that if I end open-ended and just saying, you know our audience, you know who we're talking to, we've just had this conversation, you know what we're talking about, is there any last piece of advice? And getting whatever comes out of their mouth out has been really powerful. So I think that's one big change that's more of a tweak that I'm definitely going to be using moving forward.
I'm excited. Well, more reason to stay tuned to the end of every episode. So, and then we have one more update, just a reminder that we're going to do in a few weeks, I guess, I don't know, a month, 2 months, sometime soon, we're going to do the 30th. We're going to do an update after the 30th, and we're going to do that one live. And I'm excited and nervous and all that awesome stuff. Hopefully you can get some input from the Twitch people about live stuff, so this goes amazing and awesome. But how can people get on the list so they can join us for that? Because it'll be so exciting. If you join us for this live event, we're going to love you forever. And so you'll be always known as special to Jeremy if you make it to this live, when it's the first one ever. So you're going to be like part of the core of the community. So that just sounds like all the reason you need to sign up. So what can they do to get notification of that?
Yeah, I'd love to have you there. I don't know if any or who's going to show up. So if you show up, Nathan's right, it's going to be impactful, and I'm going to remember that. But really the best way to be notified is to subscribe to the email list. If you go to my website, whyinfluence.com, whyinfluence.com, and scroll to the bottom, you can subscribe to the email list. And I'll try to do my best with posting on Instagram and sharing it in most places, just to announce it and give a little bit of a heads up of when it's coming. But the best way would be on the email list. Also, if you want to join the Discord group, which I've only have 2 people in there right now. I've got my sister and one random person who hasn't said anything yet. That's where I'm trying to build my community, and it's struggling a bit right now, but I think maybe I'll learn some stuff at the Twitch conference on how to get people on there.
Yeah, how do we get on there? I'm not familiar with Discord, so give me a brief. How does that work? What do I do?
Yeah, so that's basically where I want the community to sit. I'm not a huge fan of Facebook and Facebook groups. I'd like to keep things off of there as best I can. So Discord is just another way of doing it. It's basically like a Facebook group, but you have a little more functionality to it. You can create like sub chat rooms, and you can have conversations. You can have announcements. Like if I go live, it'll say, hey, Jeremy just went live on Why Influence. So there's a lot more components and capability that comes from it than a Facebook group. The main thing is that most people, especially of the older ages, aren't on there, but it's not that hard. You can go to my website, whyinfluence.com, scroll to the bottom, and in the bottom right, it says join the Discord group or join the Discord community. And you click that, it'll bring you to a page that says like you can join. And if you don't have an account, you just create an account. I think you can also use your Google and your other accounts, so you don't have to like create a whole new account.
All right, cool. So there's a link. There's a link down on the bottom of the website, and I'm sure you'll put another one in the show notes. So You can join the community at Discord. And obviously, again, right now there's the sister and one other person. And so, again, if you want to get closer to Jeremy, get to know him, get him to know you, that's the place to do it, right? Because if you're an early adopter, like get yourself known. You're in a unique position that no one will be in again. So join the Discord, join us on the live. Jeremy, thank you so much for having me back and letting me hang out with you and your group some more. And I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on and interviewing me again for an update. And I'm definitely looking forward to doing this live on episode 30 and seeing who shows up, and they're going to be able to ask questions and stuff too. So I'm happy to share my journey. I feel like I almost want to give more updates than every 10 just because there's so many changes that have been happening. But maybe that's something we'll evaluate after we hit the next one based on the feedback of you guys. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you for taking the time to listen to the episode. Well, that concludes this episode. I hope you were able to get some value from listening to this episode. I'm trying to share my journey with you so that you can see what it's like to start putting yourself out there, because before starting this podcast, I didn't post online, didn't share, and now I'm 30 interviews into a podcast, and I've already experienced so much growth. And it's just a journey that constantly requires pushing your comfort zone, and I hope that this episode helps you with your journey. If you know anybody that is thinking about starting a podcast or thinking about putting themselves out there, then I think it would be really great for you to share this episode with them, because it's just showcasing what the experience is like. And I've shared it before even starting the podcast. I shared it after doing 10 episodes. I've shared it this time after 20. And then after doing 30 episodes, I'm going to be doing a live interview where Nathan's going to be asking questions, and you can engage by asking questions, and he'll refer those questions over to me, and we'll just do a live interview after 30. But I'm trying to help you on your journey, or the people that you know. So if there's anybody in your network that you think can benefit from hearing some of the stuff shared in this episode or in any other episode, then it would be awesome if you could share it with them. If you want to be part of the Why Influence community, the easiest way to join is to go to whydiscord.com, WHY Discord, DISCORD.com, whydiscord.com, and that'll refer you over to our community on the Discord channel. Thanks so much for sticking it through to the end and listening to this episode. I hope you have a great remainder of your day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.